Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Eric Gallina and this is FORMCAST. Today I'm joined by Maximilian Missoni, who is Head of Design at Polestar. Welcome, Max.
Hi, Eric.
So, Max, we've known one another for a long time, and I think we met when you were still working at Volkswagen. I remember having a conversation with you at one of these auto shows when there used to be auto shows. We've met at several auto shows over the course of the time that we've known one another, probably better part of a decade, where, you know, in Detroit, in Geneva, even in Forsheim. But I'd like to go back to discuss who you are and what you do. Basically, I'd like to go back to the beginning and find out, how does a kid from Austria get into designing cars? Was that always a passion of yours?
Always is a difficult word. I mean, I would say it started when I was 10 or something like that. I remember I think most of us, we sketch cars when we were quite young, and I sketched all sorts of things, flying things, floating things, you know, submarines and ships and cars and all things that are moving in a way. And they have some spatial component to them. There's some interior to them, and they have a more complicated setup. So I was drawing them first, only side views, I remember, as a kid. And I was quite fascinated by boats in the beginning. And I even, as a teenager, engaged in some of those seminars. I remember my parents trying to find these seminars where, like, people can learn how to do boat design or things like that. So that, and then in one of the boat magazines, there was a long article about Pininfarina. And that's when I, for the first time, saw these amazing car sketches and this kind of the whole story around the sports cars they've designed, the history. And that's when I got hooked on cars. And that's when I switched track a little bit. And then I got more and more interested in the car side of mobility.
Right. That's a good one to start off with. I mean, Pininfarina, to see an article on Pininfarina, that must have really been something quite easy to latch onto and to say, hey, you know, this is something that I'm actually quite interested in. I mean, you know, what was the advertisement? Because I mean, this is a company that worked with Ferrari for like 70 years. Like
it was a Ferrari concept car that they explained and that they told the story about. But it was also a little bit the realization that, you know, being a kid from Austria, there's not really much sea anywhere around. So, and realizing that there are people growing up in somewhere in the coastal city and growing up with the water and so on, which, by the way, for me now is an absolute dream that I am in Sweden. You know, it takes me 5 minutes literally, and I'm at the sea.
We're gonna get to that in a moment. From that initial encounter with that Pininfarina advertisement and in that boat magazine, how did you get down that path for automotive design? Because you know, in Austria, I mean, of course, you know, there's design schools in at the RCA where you went to, but you didn't start out at the RCA. Obviously, that was a master's level program even back then. So how did you pursue that kind of dream, being in Austria, where, as you say, there is no car industry, there is no, you know, no means for you to kind of pursue that. So what did you do initially?
I started looking into schools and trying to figure out where are the schools that offer these kind of programs. And then I found the art center in Switzerland. That was still the time, I think there were the last couple of years where it was actually up and running. And I do think that was a postgraduate program as well. And when that became clear, then I looked for an undergrad program, and would say ended up choosing between a normal school or an undergrad school in Graz, which is where I'm from, and then one in Linz, another town in Austria. And the one in Linz was a university. It had some tradition. There were some students that ended up in the car industry. So I thought, okay, that's a good bet to start off with. And that's what I did. I did my undergrad program in Austria. And in the meantime, I was looking for internships at VW. And that worked out pretty well. So I got an internship at VW in Wolfsburg. And then while I was there, I was kind of pushed into, or not pushed into, but I kind of got myself into more and more serious programs. So I started working on competitions for production, which is something that I have now really pushed for at Volvo as well, that I want students to not only do their own thing, but they have to do this. This is one of the 3 pillars of our internship program. It's like you do your own thing, you support realistic design programs where it's needed for details or concept cars on smaller bits and pieces, where you learn how it is to work under pressure and to translate something into reality. But then you also compete with the big guns for a real production car and see how far you get. And I did that in those days at VW as well. And my model got, developed and taken into the next scale and at some point they said, well, don't you want to stay here? And I was like, well, hold on a minute. I'm not finished with my studies. I need to complete my studies. But I always wanted to go to the Royal College. How about that? And then in those days, I don't know if it's still the case, but in those days, companies sponsored students to do postgraduate or programs in schools, so Royal College or Art Center. So they did that with me. We agreed on that, and it's great. It was like a jackpot. You get your education paid, and you have a guaranteed job afterwards. So that was a happy moment, I remember.
Absolutely, that's amazing. Like you say, the best of both worlds. You get an education, and at the same time, you have a job waiting for you when you come out. And yeah, I think at the time that may have been common practice. I know probably a handful of people that have gotten sponsored by universities over the course of doing this job. I've come across people maybe a handful of times that have had that good fortune. I don't think that's the case anymore very much. Certainly there are a few people that do come and do some studies afterwards whilst they do already have a job, and I think that's a really good point for the companies that they are working for, because young people, as you well know, are full of ideas, right? And that's, as you get older, you kind of miss out, I think, on some of that creativity that these guys are just gushing, bursting at the seams with. So it's really important to have, I think, those younger people to come in and give you some of their perspectives, right? Because for them, it's limitless. They don't know confines, right? There is no limit. There is no. So anyway, that's really interesting. Great, nice. So
one thing,
yeah, go on,
Eric. One thing, just that you said that interns or students or young people come in with all these ideas. That is totally true. And my experience is when you get fed with the right prerequisites, with the right, I wouldn't say constraints, but with the right input in that phase, you actually can come up with stuff that is extremely relevant, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years, but many, many years later. I remember things we did at the RCA as our own vision. They are becoming reality as we speak now. We're working on things now in the car industry that all the students had all foreseen, let's say 20 years ago. So it's a proof to me that you really listen. You need to listen carefully, but you need to make sure that you have the right foundation for that. That's why it's good that there's always this duality of working on realistic stuff, so you get all this input you need to channel your creativity in the right direction. But at the same time, you get to do whatever you think is going to be the future at that point in your career.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's what's interesting about it, right? It's design as a whole is all about anticipating what customers want, right? It's certainly in automotive design, you guys have such an incredible lead time that you need to look 5 years down the line, maybe even longer, whereby, perhaps sportswear is a little bit more, fast changing, right? Every season you've got something new, so they don't necessarily, but perhaps they recycle more anyway. But no, that's really interesting. I mean, your degree show project, I think I spoke with Sam Livingstone about this, was something that was quite prescient as well. It was like you did some sort of collaboration between brands, which we're now seeing a bit more, I guess, kind of develop. And you also did, I think it was an electric car, wasn't it? I mean, this is years ago.
That's 20 years ago, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's 20 years
ago. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's when you think about it, I don't feel like it's 20 years ago, but it seems to be. So no, it was two projects. It was two electric cars. One was a tiny little urban mobility project that was a collaboration between Apple, VW, and British Petroleum, actually. So they would convert their petrol stations into charging docking stations for these little city cars, and VW would do the engineering and the development, and Apple would offer the branding and the software side, and they do UX side. So it's like, okay. So that was 20 years ago. That was this
Amazing.
one. And we did it in VR. So that was the first student show in VR. I got support for that. So that was cool. So the model didn't exist. It was a VR station. And the second one was an autonomous pod, which is, since then, it's in the air and
Every
it's happened
student
over and over.
project.
But it was an autonomous pod which used magnetic rails instead of, it wasn't self-propelled. It was propelled by a magnetic field, like a maglev, just without the lev component.
Okay.
So and trains would do that. There was a research project on a German university where they tried to do this for trains minus the levitation part. And the idea was, how could you translate that into motorways and cars, and how could you migrate them from doing it fully self-propelled to lanes that are dedicated to this kind of propulsion, and how could you even do it with transitioning? So how do you do the construction work so you don't disrupt traffic and so on? So this was a project in those days, and it was all about the interior configurations. How can you sleep and watch movies together, and all things that are very relevant now when you think of robo-taxis and level 5 autonomy.
Absolutely. That's incredible. Wow. So already you were quite future thinking. No, that's brilliant. And I think, like I said before, that's kind of the designer's role. And I think we'll get into that a bit more in the future, where in later on in this conversation, because I think in a lot of ways the designer's role is changing. But let's stick on this one topic for the moment, where I really want to go through into that transition. So immediately after graduation, then obviously you had a job. You went and worked in-house within Volkswagen, and I think you worked in Potsdam, right, which was an advanced design studio. Did you go directly into that, strategic design center, advanced design, and working in that category of products, or did you start in another area and then work in Potsdam eventually?
I started in the heart of VW in Wolfsburg, in the factory, and when I think back now, they were some of my best years. Or I mean, I still love my job and enjoy my job, but they were, from a creative point of view and from a team point of view, from the energy, they were some of my best years. And when I think back, I'm thinking, okay, my view was out on a big cooling tower from a power plant that was powering the complete factory, and parking lots. So it wasn't really the most lovely place to be, but somehow the energy we had in the studio and all the enthusiasm, and I guess my own enthusiasm at that point, it was really a couple of really amazing years. It started with Concept R. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes.
That was my first project I did when I started after. It was this
Okay.
mid-engine roadster. It's
Right.
like
Oh,
a
right.
young
Okay.
student coming to VW, the company of Golf and Polo, and doing a mid-engine roadster and thinking, oh, that's cool. That's a surprise. But it was a big competition, and for some reason, what I did struck a chord, and this went on to become a concept car. So I was, again, I felt really lucky to be at the right time at the right place, and we did that car. That
Yeah.
was
No,
my project.
it seems like you've been at the right place at the right time a number of times over the course of your career. I mean, you're talking about a Volkswagen concept, like what, 20 years ago or so. But I remember for me, and I think this is probably one of the earliest conversations that we had, was the Volkswagen XL1. And when that car came out, that was a watershed moment in my opinion. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to drive that car around in London, and that was like a little spaceship. I mean, the thing was low and wide. It had this little 3-cylinder engine kind of kicking off in the back of your ear if
Yeah,
if
well,
it
that was
ran.
maybe not the best part of it.
No, but I mean, it was loud and raucous, and it had like zero assistance, and I was just like, but this thing looked like it had just dropped down from space. So it was
I'm
incredible. I
I'm
mean,
glad you like it.
I did. I
But
loved I loved that
I
thing.
have to say, because it sounds like that, and it's kind of cool that it's perceived like that. I've been at the right place at the right time, but there were quite a few years in between those things, and there was a lot of hard work. I mean, I really worked my butt off in the first couple of years, like as we all do in design. We're so enthusiastic, we love it so much that we just give everything for it, and so did I. And I was quite successful in competitions, but I had many of cases where things were picked, where they were developed to a certain degree, where we had even, in some instances, we even had the tools being milled. And then new management came, different top management decisions, and it was like, oh, but this car we stop, we don't develop that one. Same with the Roadster. I mean, things went really well, and there was this momentum of like, okay, we're going to take this company into the premium segment. We're going to really, and then suddenly things changed. There was some kind of eruption or some kind of thing happening that was out of my control, and things were cancelled. And even though I knew exactly that it wasn't my fault, you really affected by this. And I remember, this is quite personal to me, I remember having this discussion with Thomas a couple of years ago, because I had a couple of cars that were lined up for production. And from your experience talking to designers, how much work and how much effort, blood, sweat and tears it takes to get things in a big company lined up for production, and then they're just cancelled out of the blue. You have this moment of like, okay, don't worry about it. I'm gonna leave and do something else. Or you say, okay, fine, these were a couple of years of my life. Now I'm gonna try and reinvent myself and do what's next and start from zero. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. And I had this conversation with Thomas once, many years afterwards, where it was about developing me into management, where I told him, well, yeah, but you remember that all these cars that were so successful and so liked, they got cancelled, and is this really the foundation you want to have for somebody being developed into management? And he was like, but look, the way how you dealt with it, this is what I was looking for. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who don't give up, who just keep going and keep proving that they can do this under new management with different prerequisites, and don't just throw everything in and leave.
Right.
And it really resonated with me, and that's something I also relate to designers in my team now who come to me, and if they lose a project or something, I try to tell them that it's not about how much success you pile up over the years, because in a career there will be success, and there'll be more and more. It's how you deal with failure is what really makes you resilient and what makes you successful in the long run.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the probably the most frustrating part of being a designer. I mean, I hear it from everyone, and a lot of people, you're right, can't take the heat, and they have to they get frustrated time and time and time again because projects get canceled, things get changed, and it's your ability to be able to pick up and dust yourself off and do it again that makes you resilient and makes you successful in the end of the day, because a lot of the things that you do develop, and you might be invested in it, and then it might get canceled, and you really need to know how to deal with that. So clearly you have on multiple occasions. You're not always winning projects. I mean, I would say the majority of designers that I speak with anyway, they end up losing a lot more than they win, but it's the way that they continue to persevere, continue to come up with innovative solutions, continue to develop projects, and then ultimately when they do win, it's like a big win, right? It's something that feels incredible. And so again, coming back to being at the right place at the right time, I mean, obviously we discussed the X01. I had a brilliant drive in that car, and people can read about it on Form Trends. But another story that they can read about on Form Trends is the the XC40. So when you left Volkswagen, you moved into Volvo, and that was back in 2013, if I'm
12.
not mistaken. So it's quite a
12.
long time back.
Mm.
And you joined. Thomas had gone to Volvo from Volkswagen. You joined as exterior design director of this is pre-Polestar, of course, and you ended up working on a series of projects. And you and Thomas, um, at the time, Robin Page, I think, joined shortly thereafter, but he wasn't there at the time. You guys were just kind of pushing forward with this new brand, new design language, new brand identity, and I mean, you guys were just hitting it out of the park, right? Coming up with some really amazing solutions and eventually revamping the entire range. So the XC40 is something that I want to discuss because that is, you know, a car that is extremely successful right now. It was an in an emerging segment, and it's the exterior design um, was something that was honed under your direction. So recently, I also had a turn behind the Polestar 2, which obviously has the same CMA platform as the XC40.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I wanted to discuss with you is a little bit that transition moving from VW into Volvo, and then what, to me, everybody knows that Volvo is a Scandinavian brand, but I want to go a little bit deeper and find out what makes what makes it a Scandinavian brand? What are those traits? What are Scandinavian, what is Scandinavian design? And as a German, or as an Austrian rather, having worked in Germany for a big, massive German company and moving into Sweden, how did you interpret that from an outsider's perspective and then make it your job and own that?
Mm. I think the first, it's not exactly an answer to this question, but I think it's quite an important factor of the whole story of Volvo's last or current generation, was that Volvo team or the whole company had to be helped to understand, I don't want to say taught, but helped to understand that you can combine Scandinavia and luxury. Because in Scandinavia, luxury is a little bit of a frowned upon thing. Everybody is trying to not stand out too much. There's a whole societal trend, I would say, or societal behavior that makes people feel good when we're all the same, and it's good. It gets the society into a very sophisticated place. However, when you then come and say, okay, Volvo can be and will be a luxury car brand, everybody's like, no, but that's not what Volvo is all about. It's about safety, because here in this country, Volvo is normal. You see so many out there. Everybody grew up in a Volvo. And I think when Thomas and myself and then Robin, the task was quite clear. It was a clear path to say Volvo is perceived internationally as a premium, if not luxury brand, but now the design has to reflect that as well. The quality is there, the engineering is there, the safety clearly was there, but now the design has to reflect this premium/luxury element. And to bring these two things together, luxury in a Scandinavian way, that was very exciting and a big shift for the company. And I think looking back, now with a bit of distance, it's much easier to analyze it for myself, because again, when you're a designer, you're so close to everything, you get so emotional about what you do that you always need a little bit of external feedback to understand if it's congruent with what you believe in or feel. But now looking back, I think yes, it worked really well. The products really reflect Scandinavia. A lot of that is obviously in the interior. You get this Scandinavian furniture design, the sophistication, the soft flowing shapes. I think all of that is very, very Scandinavian, the natural materials. So that was a very nice transition. And then in the exterior, what we did is we combined the luxury element with very high quality, sophisticated surfacing. So the skills that I had learned in my career to really make sure that it's perfectly crafted, plus representing safety. And that was an interesting thought process in the beginning. How do you communicate safety with shape? And literally, I mean, this shape that we're talking about is created from a 0.8 millimeter sheet of steel, of metal. So how do you turn something that's 0.8 millimeters into something that looks extremely strong, solid, and sturdy? And we kind of had this idea of Boolean operations, you know, extracting volume from a solid shape, and how do you do that in an elegant way, and so on and so forth. And if you really look in detail, you will find all these cues, and especially in the XC40, that brings me back to the XC40, for such a small car, it's extremely sturdy and powerful looking and has a ton of character. This is another thing. We really like to get a lot of intelligence and character into the physiognomy of the cars.
Yeah. No, for sure. There's a whole lot of character. I do want to bring you back to what it is that you said before, because in my opinion, I mean, I grew up in the US, and I don't think that anyone would cross shop. Perhaps Saab was more like the quirky one that you would get instead of a Mercedes-Benz back in the day, but I don't think anyone was cross shopping Volvos with BMWs and Mercedes back then. And you guys came and you changed that perception. You guys really put Volvo on the map through design, by saying we're going to do something that is really quite appealing from a design perspective and a luxury and an amenities perspective and a general user experience perspective. And you started developing these products that were incredibly refined, incredibly well thought through, and that's when that shift happened. Because I don't think anybody was cross-shopping Volvos with Mercedes products at that point. But no, it is incredibly well done. Now, one of the things I suppose I'm going to put you on the spot here, Max. I have to, and I hope you don't want me to. You're not going to take it too personally, because it isn't. It's, to me, now you are most recently taken over Polestar. You're no longer involved with Volvo. That was kind of, you've done that. You've handed over the reins to Tijan, which is great. And now you're focused exclusively on Polestar. Now, I don't know if the rest of the team has followed suit, because I know at some point there was, a crossover, right? I mean, you guys were working on Volvo products, you guys were working on Polestar products, and the team was doing both. So now you are specifically dedicated to the Polestar brand. Is the rest of the team following in that? Have you divided that aspect of it?
Well, first of all, technically that's not entirely correct, because I still have a small part of my time is dedicated and reserved for Volvo. So I'm still
Okay.
advising in terms of design. That was the agreement that we had,
Okay.
because we had such a good track record as a team of heads of design. So we want to keep the knowledge and our way of giving each other feedback in the system. So that's a small thing, but it's the technically correct way. But yes,
Okay.
I'm 100% responsible for Polestar design. And the team question is a very tricky one, because it started all in the same team, and now we're gradually the projects are clearly split, and people are dedicated to the two different brands. And we are also creating a core team of people who are exclusively Polestar designers, and this team will grow. And
Okay.
currently that's quite easy, because all the programs that we have in the pipeline are manned with designers that work exclusively on these Polestar programs, and those were easy to transition into Polestar as a unique design team and a unique design brand. Over time, this team will grow, but there are many roles that, where you don't need 100% role, so you kind of split your time. And these are more the peripheral disciplines, if you will. And that's where we will still leverage the fact that we have specialists in both brands, and we can commission specialists to help us out for certain topics. And that will be specifically in areas as like UX, for example, or even partially color materials, where in a group, and you know how it is from other big groups. It would be really silly if you are a group and you are connected so closely that you develop everything individually again and again and again. So it's good to keep certain things that require the same electrical systems or require this, are on the same platforms, that they are also aligned in design. And that doesn't mean that the final expression won't be individual for both brands, but it means that the whole logic behind it, I mean, talking about user experience, that the whole logic and the system behind it is the same or similar.
Okay, no, that was definitely something that I wanted to touch on. I mean, the last time we spoke, we did an interview on the Polestar Precept, so this is going back some now. And obviously, before it was confirmed that you would be working exclusively on the Polestar brand. But clearly, that's not entirely the full story because you are still working and contributing to Volvo. But you know, if anybody wants to read that interview that we did about Precept, I mean, you did go well into depth, and I'm not going to revisit that here. But you know, obviously they can go and navigate over to Form Trends and read that. But to me, and this is what I was talking about before, I don't want you to get offended by this because I recently had to turn behind the wheel of the Polestar 2. I've driven the XC40. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, I had articles on both cars on the website, but to me, there was a lot of, and I know both started off life as Volvo products, just like the Polestar 1 did, right? As a concept car within the Polestar brand. Now, to me, there's a lot of crossover within both of those products. And, you know, I suppose, I don't know, I don't think this could be, you know, would be different if you had clear separation between the designers within the group. I think it has more to do with economies of scale, right? And I suppose from my perspective, it's like the Polestar 2 clearly is a very different product than anything that's in the Volvo lineup. And because it's all electric, the first all electric vehicle, it kind of makes sense to have it stand on its own as part of the Polestar brand, which is moving all electric. I guess my main question here to you is, with every automaker having to go down this electric road in the very near future, right? We're talking about things that are bigger than companies themselves, but policies, you know, legal regulations that are coming in force, where every manufacturer has to put out electric cars in order to remain relevant and continue to exist some way or form, unless you're, you know, really like a niche volume, which Polestar rather is not. So Volvo will need to do that. And the XC40 is already electrified, and there's a lot of crossover. Even though they're built on the same platform, they're different typologies of vehicles. That kind of crossover is like, I love what you do. I don't want you to be out of a job. And, you know, indeed, the Polestar brand is brilliant, but I kind of question its, not only its positioning, but its you know, what makes it different? Like, because you're talking, you know, you say Volvo is moving up, and in fact it is, into this premium class. So the positioning there, therefore, of Polestar is kind of like in this same sector, if you will, right? The same premium luxury electric vehicle manufacturer. What makes it different?
It's a good question, but there's a very clear answer to this. And this is, it's definitely not an electrification question, because you're right. In some countries, there will be laws that will prevent combustion cars to be even allowed to be on the roads in certain, in a decade from now, or even less than that. So, I mean, we will all go towards electrification. I think that's pretty clear, and most people have understood that now, and also the benefits of the powertrain. So that cannot be the differentiator, and that will not be the differentiator. Both brands will go electric, but it is a branding question, and it's also a question from a customer point of view. I think Volvo has a very clear heritage that points towards Scandinavian design, points towards safety, points towards the human-centric lifestyle. So it's all about, its technologies in the background, it takes care of you, it's embracing, it's encompassing, it's like it's the car that takes care of you. But there was a certain gap in the stretch that I think a Volvo brand can do and should do, which is where Polestar comes in. Polestar is the performance one, the tech one. It's much more playful, if you will, with technology in the beginning. So Polestar is we call it the guiding star. So Polestar is going into technology, is exploring the technology, is proving a point, and then Volvo comes in with its wisdom and then takes it over, and it's in the second layer, and it just does its job, and it's there and it works. And Polestar is the explorer. So I think, and in terms of performance, there was also always a certain disconnect, I feel, between Volvo, the brand and the products, to performance as we know it from some German brands, for example. So I think that's where Polestar can come in and fill that void, and does it already. I mean, you've driven Polestar 2, and for the type of product and the type of segment it is in, it's an incredibly performant and fun to drive car.
It is. It is. I was really quite shocked, to be honest, because it weighs 2.1 tons and it still accelerates like 4.5 seconds, 0 to 60 in this performance pack that I was
and it's
driving.
Not only the
really impressive.
Line. It's not only the straight line acceleration, that because electric cars tend to, if they have a big battery and they have fairly powerful motors, they tend to have a good straight line acceleration. It's the driving dynamics, and it's the chassis tuning of this car that makes it so special. And we have a guy here, Joachim. He is like, he's like us designers. He's as nerdy as we are, but when it comes to the chassis tuning, he spends thousands of hours, and he's so proud how Polestar 2, how the recuperation seamlessly go into the Brembo brakes that then really grip really hard, and how, he's on test track driving the car with a small finger. It's his pride and joy, and you feel the difference. And that's what Polestar can deliver as a brand.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Okay. No, that's awesome. So I really appreciate you going into that, because clearly it's Polestar's brand identity, right? And that is what is defining it and what is going to clearly differentiate it from other vehicles. Now, if we're looking again kind of at a macro level, you mentioned some of these things that are happening right now in the industry, but it's clear that there's a lot that's happening in the automotive and the transportation design industry right now. It's undergoing massive change. And so I guess, we talked about how you got into design in the beginning, and you were actually quite ahead of your time, I would say, looking into things such as electrification and brand partnerships, and devising things where there were synergies to be had amongst different companies to create in unison a holistic product. All of those things are happening right now in the industry, and even more so. I mean, we're talking about there's so many different changes, the political, economic, societal, cultural. I mean, there's all sorts of different things. And as a designer now, you have to kind of consider so many different aspects: sustainability, as well as usability, as well as connectivity, policy, even as we mentioned earlier, and in order to design a holistic and an appealing experience. So I suppose from your perspective, what is the role of the designer in this evolving landscape? To me, it seems like it's getting a hell of a lot more intellectual than somebody drawing pretty images and styling as they did back in the day, right? It's no longer let's do something that people like the aesthetic of. It's much more like branding, like you were talking about. It's holistic qualities. It's what are people going to buy into? A lifestyle, something that they can appreciate from all sorts of different levels. So tell me a little bit, what is that? What is the role of the designer, and how can people learn about how to do that?
Now, I'm glad you asked this question, because I think we designers, we've been branded a little bit with this idea. Okay, you do a nice sketch, and then you kind of put in the post to engineering, and then they're like, oh my God, how do we? And then and then after a while, it's a decent car popping out at the end, and we still struggle with this kind of image. I mean, it's nice from an artistic point of view. Hey, you can draw. You're so creative. But that's really not what good design is all about. And first of all, it's all about problem solving and sometimes problem creating. I mean, I feel like we're creating so many problems for engineering that they didn't know they had. but it's because we have a skill to anticipate what people want to have or will need in the future. This is like an intrinsic skill. I think that's it's practiced over our studying times, our education, because in the beginning there's a bit of input. There's quite a lot of input, like art history and technical drawing and engineering and all these things. But there's a big chunk of our education is trying to feel what's next and output. So we are really sensitive. We're very sensitive people. And in terms of our role, I think in the car industry now, over the last many decades, our job was to package an incremental improvement of technology into a different looking object so that people would understand, oh, I need to have this, it's new, so it's different, it's new, and I gotta have it. So and it's not a very good place to be in. I think where we are getting into now, but being the scouts, being the people who identify trends, who wake up product planning and say, hey, look, yes, you can extrapolate that curve, but it's maybe not going to go that way. Maybe it's going to go this way. It's completely somewhere else. And that's where we can really apply our sensitivity and affect change. And we thought that electrification is a big jump for proportions, for interior space, for all these things. And it clearly is. But it's still just a powertrain. Autonomy, when we're talking level 4 or even further level 5, is a huge paradigm change for us as designers, how we can design things. And you talked about legislation. Things will completely open up when we don't need to be in charge anymore as a driver. Suddenly, and there's so many regulations and laws connected to the fact that the driver needs to be in control and see certain things at certain times and react and so on. And if that's out of the picture, suddenly the design can radically change. And we've done some of these studies already as students, of course, 20 years ago, but we're doing them now. We had 360C on the Volvo side, which is a car that deals with from a design point of view, how do you communicate with pedestrians and all of these things. And then, so you mentioned it yourself, the third big thing is going to be circularity. And at first you might think that's something that engineering has to deal with because, okay, we're going to go more and more into sustainable materials, but that these materials actually have properties that have quite a strong impact on what we do. And if we're clever, we can leverage the methodology, how they are produced, how they're sourced, and we can leverage that into a new design aesthetic. And that's something that we did with Precept, for example.
That brings us into, it's a very nice transition then, I think, into the Polestar design competition, which is actually currently running right now, and is open to professional and non-professional designers as well. And so this year's theme, if I've got it correctly, is to encourage positive change in society, including responses to the ongoing climate crisis. Clearly, the environment is a huge topic that we need to address, and you're obviously bringing designers in to address these issues of climate change. Now, the progressive theme should be evident in the designs, is what it says. So, I guess from your perspective, as head of design for Polestar, what is kind of, it's great to have a platform, I think, for designers to come in and contribute and win prizes and awards and Cintiq templates or Wacom, whatever it is that you guys are giving away as prizes. But as you said, when you came out, you had a job, going to Volkswagen. So what is kind of the goal for Polestar, right? Because obviously for designers, it's a no-brainer, right? You want to join, you want to become part of this design contest because you increase your visibility, you get to work on some cool projects. Hopefully, at the end of it, maybe somebody will notice you, whether it's within the company, whether it's within Polestar or another company, and notice your work and see your work and hopefully bring you on board into this massively competitive industry that we're all working in. But from Polestar, why are you doing that? And you kind of touched on that in the beginning, but I didn't actually get the full gist of it. So fill me in. Why this design competition?
Well, the interesting thing with the Polestar design community is the way how it started. Because you might think that this is a marketing instrument or something that was created by our communication people to say, oh, we need to be present on this platform. But it's nothing like that. It is actually JP, our design manager in interiors. He started his own. He had a name for it. He started his own design platform that was more and more inspiring to people, and he shared ideas, and it had a very nice aesthetic style. And we then said, why can't you do that with Polestar? I mean, why don't you want to do that a bit more? Combine that with your job. And then he started kept doing the same thing under Polestar Design Community, and it kept growing and growing, and he started personally talking to people, and there wasn't any end goal with this. It wasn't like you have to have these many followers and it needs to be that successful, we're going to have this and that. It was more like a bunch of enthusiasts that started throwing sketches around, and then this Inktober competition happened where they all put sketches in, and the winner was the winner. It wasn't really anything monetary or anything planned in that sense. And out of that spun the idea of saying, can't we do an annual competition that's a bit more organized and professional, and really give people proper awards. And also, and that's for me the most beautiful thing about this competition, is not just wait for stuff to come in and then judge it and then give people an award for it, but in this contest we support designers with their design, give them coaching, provide them CAD modelers, and make it shine. And so after that, they don't only have a prize or not, if they win or not, but they also have a project that they can then use for themselves in their portfolios and so on, where they had kind of professional support and not design support, because it's still their design. We're not going to make it into a Polestar. We're like, this is your vision for a Polestar, whatever it is, flying or floating again, but we're going to help you, we're going to support you so you can make it as good as you can. And that's for the shortlisted ones. So they get a hell of a benefit out of that, because this is a really good project they can then showcase off, and it's still their design work. So we really like this collaboration. It worked perfectly well last time, and it's a lot of fun for everybody. I mean, it's mostly to really be creative together for the team and for them. And the team knows, the Polestar design team knows, we don't have to. For once, there are no constraints. We can help people to make their stuff just simply awesome, and it shows us how much enthusiasm there's behind the brand.
Yeah, no, clearly. I mean, look, as you mentioned earlier, it seems like there's a whole lot of companies, regardless of whether they're in recruitment or some other, aspect, creating different channels of communication, because that's what you need to do these days. You need to have a video production facility within an automaker. You need to have, there's all sorts of different things in order to get and be present on all of these different social platforms. And it's very much a marketing exercise, right? Very few of these things are actually genuine. It's just like, we're creating content so that we can eventually sell our services. Now, to me, the Polestar design community doesn't come off that way, but it is very much sharing what's happening within Polestar, so it could be seen that way. Now, the competition side of things, however, is much more. I definitely understand the benefits for the young designer, right? Somebody that will get coaching, will get prize money, will get some sort of tablet as a reward. But for me, it seems like it's a big investment for you, for your time, because you've got a lot of things to do and a lot of things on your plates, as does JP, and Sam is also part of this judging panel. So the three of you have to take this on, and I'm sure that perhaps you're sharing along with other members of the design team some of these things that are projects that are coming through and hitting your desk and getting feedback from the people that you're working with. and so dividing the tasks in that in the reviews, if you will, in that sense. But I guess for me, it's like, how does that weave into what you and the team are doing over at Polestar? Like, it's not like, I mean, do you see it as a way to kind of generate ideas for the future of the brand? Because, as you mentioned, your thing was, cross collaboration in your degree show project, but I think we're going to see a lot more of that within, so one of these projects that won last year was a boat, which I thought was absolutely amazing, and very much in tune with what Polestar is doing from a graphic and a design language perspective, minimalist, clean, future, luxury, all of that. So what's happening within the competition and the resources that you're dedicating into doing this and promoting this and the manpower you're throwing at it weave into what Polestar is about? Explain that to me, please.
I mean, as I said, it is about us being enthusiastic about design and sharing that enthusiasm. And that's frankly it. I mean, there is a second aspect to this, which is that we have a very good way to see who could fit in the team. Because, I mean, that's the best way. If there are people proactively, enthusiastically, wrapping their head around the future of Polestar, there might be a good reason for us to collaborate, to kind of, hire them into the team. And we are growing. So for us, that's mostly, you can find nowadays a lot of portfolios of designers on Instagram. They have their own account, they curate it, they post stuff. And this is just a way for them to get a wider audience, because obviously there's thousands and thousands of followers in the Polestar community. And obviously me and Thomas were part of the audience. So it's a way to connect that way, and also for us to find future talent.
Right. No, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And that's great. Okay, so the Polestar Design competition is going on right now, and then the competition results are going to be announced at the end of September. Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right.
All right, so it gives you guys a couple of months over the summer to kind of go through some of the, or at least when you return from the summer, to go through stuff and whittle it down. And I'm sure that must be an arduous task, going through all of the entries that are sent, because last year you had over 600, if I'm not mistaken. You had a whole heap of entrants, and this year, because of it was quite well publicized last year as well. It's probably going to get a hell of a lot more interest this year, especially because you guys are giving away, I think, better prizes this year as well. But it's not only about the prizes, yes.
No, but you said it was publicized last year. That was a surprise to us, how much it was picked up. And also, even more interestingly, there were people following the community that we didn't know that they were following, which was the creative director of Balenciaga, or his people. And they saw these creations by the community, the entries for the contest. And they contacted us and say, look, we're doing this computer game to launch our new collection. Afterworld, it was called, where people can walk through a complete fantasy future world. And we would love to have some of these vehicles in the game. And since we had that process of taking these things into models and really resolving the corners and working them out together with the contestants, we had these things ready, and it was a very short deadline. So we're like, okay, we called people up and said, are you okay being published in this computer game by this fashion brand? And obviously most or all of the people said, yeah, sure, no problem. And then this was picked up by Forbes magazine, and they wrote about the collaboration, with these students or these designers. And suddenly people ended up, from taking part in a contest, they ended up in Forbes magazine mentioned. So I mean, that's another benefit that comes out of these things, that as a magnifier, as a platform for your own work, is pretty amazing.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, as you say, there's a lot of students that are involved, or young designers, people that are trying to break into the industry, that are out there on Instagram trying to create sketches and things. But it's still, design is such a difficult area to break into, right? And the fact that people are up on Instagram doesn't mean that somebody's going to find what you're doing. It's it's oversaturated. There's
Right.
a hell of a lot of sketches and a lot of accounts that are showing off sketches in a whole all over the place. I mean, and it's just another one, right? You've got Behance, you've got all sorts of other places online as well where people post their work, and it's I think social media in general is a hell of a lot of work, and it needs to be done right, and that's why there's a lot of people that are out there making a lot of money being social media managers and learning the intricate ins and outs and algorithms and all the rest, because it's a hell of it's a minefield to navigate that. But anyway,
But Eric,
that's besides the point.
connecting to what you said before about the challenges to get into to get into a job. I think the ways how social media has changed this landscape. I think that really it's really significant, and I think these sites like Polestar Community give them a much larger footprint, if you will, and I think that's very, very good for the individual. And since this is genuine, I think people realize that they're not part of a marketing exercise. I think they realize that this is because JP is the heart and soul of the whole thing, and he runs that, and he has personal connection to people, and he coaches them, and they know him. I think it's a really a rare and beautiful thing, and we really want to nurture this one.
Absolutely. I mean, no, I love the interactions that I get on Instagram. I respond to every single one of them as well, and it's a great community, and they are, it's great to be engaged and to make an impact in somebody's life. I mean, that's ultimately what I've always tried to do and strived for, is add value whenever I can. Share and guide younger people that are looking to get into a career in design, and if I can, I will help them. And it is quite rewarding to do so as well. And there's nothing. It's not like there's something in it for me to gain. But I do enjoy that aspect of it, just kind of guiding people through. Because, like you said, this is something that was not afforded to us in the past.
Yeah.
We never, both you and I, when we were looking to get into doing the things that we love, there was no one, out there putting, a tutorial on YouTube, kind of instructing us on the best way to go about getting a career in automotive journalism, or indeed in design. So it's something that we had to kind of scope out and find and navigate our own way into. And fortunately, we're pretty lucky in that we did manage to do that. So okay,
the contest. Sorry, just one more word.
Yeah, no, go on.
The contest also gives us a chance to show people that design nowadays, as we said before, is also something about the thought process, the idea, the storytelling behind it. It's way more complex than putting a sketch up on Instagram and hope that somebody bites. It's much more about how do I lead through a process? How is my thinking? What's my story? And with our topics that are extremely wide, like progress is extremely wide, and it can be anything. It can be, last time we had satellites. So, I mean, it could be anything. But still what we want and how we pick our winners is the way how they tell a story with it, as well as the aesthetic side.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that I definitely wanted to get into because, the theme this year is positive change in society. That's not drawing a pretty picture,
No.
Doing something that looks good and, oh yeah, people are going to give you thumbs up, like a, sports car that's a half a meter off the ground. Very different. So this, I love the topic. I love the theme of this year's competition and ways to, how are we going to, as designers, influence change in society, help improve the world, make it a better place, add value. So again, that's, I think, something that, Polestar and FormTrends is quite aligned in that regard. So, as we were saying before, design is far more than just creating aesthetic solutions, right? stylistic, appealing solutions. And we talked a little bit about the change coming from electrification, the future autonomy, but the business model is also affecting vehicles. The design aspect of it as well in the future, right? So we're looking at shared vehicles. We're looking at subscription-based models, and again, everything kind of stems off of this experience. And one of the things when I was driving the Polestar 2 that I loved was how easy it was to kind of drive that car, right? You just walk up to it, the car detects the fact that you've got a key in your pocket, the door opens, you sit down, you put it in drive, press the brake beforehand, but you put it in drive and it just guides you down the road. And then when you arrive, you just get out of the car, it shuts off by itself, locks itself, everything is like, super intuitive, friction-free experience. And so I think that's something, well, you tell me, is that something that you're working a lot more on? Is that integration of, your smartphone into what it is that you're doing? Like connectivity wise, are you doing more from a user experience perspective? I mean, what is it that you're asking from your designer specifically within Polestar that perhaps you didn't maybe a decade ago?
I think these changes in the business model, in the way what technical possibilities we have, they affect the way how the user experience with the car changes, and that starts from things like you just mentioned to totally extreme things like when you have ride hailing, and when it's one day is going to be autonomous, and all that's a totally different user experience, and you have to design totally differently. And we are so focused now on UX that sometimes I find myself reminding our counterparts in engineering as well that, hold on a minute, we shouldn't totally forget about the core value of hardware design as well, because that's one of the things that made us great as an industry and also as a trade, that we're really, really good in the artistic component of designing objects, products. I mean, it's amazing how much character we inject into industrial products. So that, and it's sometimes because the industry is so much on steroids, that's sometimes taken as a given. You say, yeah, and then we're going to make it look awesome, no problem. I mean, that's a given. But it takes people to spend years and years and years of their life to get to that level of skill. And as you said, there's so many designers out there who would like to have a job, and there's such a fierce competition that we shouldn't forget that this is still and will be a strong focal point, together with all the new disciplines that we're working on nowadays. And there is a very, very intense focus on user experience.
No, that's great. So I suppose jumping off the back of that, and we're kind of nearing the end of this chat. I appreciate you taking the time here, Max. What do you foresee as kind of being the biggest challenges moving forward? Just to kind of give you a little bit of background of where my train of thought is. In the past, designers had an objective, right? It was art and color section. Let's make it look pretty, throw some fins on there every, couple of years and draw people in with this future experience. Now, there's so much going on. And if we, talk about just the diversification of mobility, right? Because Polestar is creating cars, but perhaps Polestar won't always be creating cars, right? You talked about living on the water and how you love boats, and being in Scandinavia, you're afforded that. And we'll talk about your hobbies in a bit more in the future, but very shortly rather. But there's a bandwidth there within Polestar that I think, from a mobility perspective, you guys could be doing a hell of a lot more. And to your collaborative project initially, through the RCA, I think that there is a lot of bandwidth, and that idea that you proposed 20 years ago has a lot of legs today. So from your perspective, because it doesn't seem like there's a very clearly defined all right, we're gonna, redesign this fender, or, in 2 years' time, we're gonna redesign these headlamps. There's so much happening right now that is very much a blue sky, white space, like where are we gonna go, where are we gonna take this, which is not a clearly defined roadmap. I think there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty right now within the automotive industry, certainly within design, of where are we going, how are we going to address some of these issues that are presented to us at the moment. And so I suppose, besides these challenges, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges from your perspective? What is something that you foresee as being the biggest challenge for the automotive design industry moving forward?
I think, and this is my personal view, I mean, there's certain milestones for the companies I've worked in or I work for, but my personal view is we're just understanding, I think, or at least it took me a while to really fully grasp it, is what an impact it has, what we do, and I'm not just saying as designers, but as a society on the planet. I mean, we were going through hundreds of years of just struggling against nature and just trying to survive, and whatever collateral we made it, we used what we had, and we used more of it and more of it. And now we understand that small twitches in our system suddenly have quite strong impact on what happens to our ecosystem. So because we're so many and because we're so effective, we're so incredibly effective. And so the big challenge, I think, will be to use less of everything. And it's a very personal topic to me. And again, if you probably talk to Sam, we've discussed this in RCA 20 years ago as well, like ideas how you can change the system to be much more circular and have much more impact. And these things are extremely relevant now more than ever. So at Polestar we have Project Zero, where it's an open challenge to engineering and design to say by a certain point in the future, how do we get to zero impact on CO in terms of CO2. And that's a huge challenge. And if you and engineers look into it, and the first big steps are quite easy to take, and the whole industry is about to take these big steps. But then when you get closer and closer to zero, you realize it's harder and harder to reach the goal. And that's where these ideas from many, many years ago come in, and these ideas are becoming more relevant, where you have to go into the business model, where you have to understand we might not be able to sell our products. We might not be able to take raw materials and sell them to people and then, maybe take them back later and recycle them. But if we don't even do that, if we keep everything in our possession, they're like precious goods, and we create our products so that whatever we put in, we can easily extract again and reuse and remanufacture and re-engineer. All of these thoughts, they are hugely challenging but hugely exciting. And that's what we're looking into. I mean, we're building components. We're building components right now into cars that are vacuum sealed, which means when one of these little items in there, like headlamps, when one of these little items in there, like an LED, breaks, you got to destroy the component to fix it. It's not so easy to repair, and that will completely have to change. I mean, and then when you think about that, what does that mean? Where does that lead us aesthetically? And that's such an exciting journey. And personally, that's something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the most appealing, because it's the unknown. You're venturing off, and then it's kind of like the world is your oyster. What are we going to do here? How can we impact and influence this?
And the first step is you have to admit to the fact that we're not perfect as an industry. You have to say, this is our footprint, this is where we are, and you can't try to fool people into believing that it's fine. And there are arguably industries that are much less progressed as the car industry is, because the car industry is very scrutinized by legislation, politics. So there is a lot of focus on what we do, but even we can be much, much better. And to admit to where we are currently is the first step.
So that brings me to where you are, which is Scandinavia. And We started off this conversation talking about what got you into design initially. Obviously it was that advertisement that you saw in a boat magazine for Pininfarina, but it was a boat magazine. So I want to talk a little bit about you and what gets you kind of interested, and what you do when you're not in the office, when you're not working on designing the next generation Volvo and Polestar products, working as a designer. You mentioned it briefly, and I kind of think I know where it is that you're going, because being in Scandinavia and living by the water, I love the water as well. I love being out on the water. I want to know a little bit more about what Max does, and I'm sure others do as well, when he's not in the studio, when he's not working on Polestar products. What do you do on your spare time? What's your hobbies? How do you let loose? How do you enjoy life?
Living so close to the water, well, I would say made one mistake. I moved to Sweden, and I held off on buying a boat for way too long, because obviously, it's quite easy to get it. There's so many boats in the system here. Now it's harder, because many people now want to spend their time at home because of the pandemic mainly. So boats are very much in demand. But when I came here, that wasn't the case. So it was easy to get. But I was always like, well, I'll wait and I'll see and do something else. But 2-3 years ago, I did it, and it's amazing. I mean, this archipelago that we have outside of Gothenburg is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's pretty unique in Europe, because you have these thousands of little islands just at your doorstep, and there is there's something in Sweden called the allemansrätten, which is it's everybody's right. So you can just go to these islands, put a tent there, make a fire, and stay there for a couple of nights, and it's totally fine. It's even if it's not your land, you can do whatever you want, within the confines of what you should be doing. But it's amazing. But what you do need is a boat. So now I made that step, and I spend a lot of time on my boat. And the good thing is, it's like I would say 7 minutes drive from Volvo is my little harbor. And it's beautiful. And since Swedish nights are days are so long in summer, you can, after work at 6-7 in the evening, you can go out to the dock and just take your boat out and spend the whole evening grilling, barbecue on the rocks with friends, and then come back at 10-11 and it's still daylight. And it's absolutely amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that sounds like a great pastime. Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, the days are so long in summer in Sweden. I remember going to Umeå one year, and for the degree show, and it was like midnight, and it looked like it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing.
Anyway,
people say you got to pay for that in winter, which is partly true. It's partly true, but then again, I was nearly going to say growing up, but more or less growing up in a design studio, you're so used working in spaces without windows that are always, you can never tell what daytime it is outside. So winters are just fine. You just spend some more time on the models and on the tube.
Yes, and Gothenburg's not that bad at the end of the day.
No,
it's because it's not as far north as Umeå, but
exactly,
it's more manageable. But you're right. I mean, I'm up here in England anyway. We have the sun sets very early in the winter time as well, and then at 10 o'clock at night in the summertime, it's still nice and daylight out here as well. So there isn't that much difference between London and Gothenburg. Maybe a little bit, but not that much. All right, so I need to ask you this question because, you work in car design. I got into this industry because I love to drive and I love cars in all shapes and forms, right? That's for me. I'm boring as anything if you're not into cars, because that's pretty much all I talk about is the cars, driving, the industry. I love cars. And so my wife is probably bored the hell out of me. Do you love cars? Do you have like some, classic cars in your garage, or is it mostly about design and you have like an awesome boat?
It's a good question, because I had, in the beginning of my career, I was surrounded by people who were absolute car nuts. They were crazy about cars and, petrol heads. And I never really felt a part of that crowd. I never really felt I was such a petrol head. But I loved design. I loved objects in motion. I loved giving industrial products character. I loved the whole brand aspect of the car industry, and I did love design in motion, but I was not a petrol head. So for me, it's perfect now to work for an electric car company where the sound of the engine or the stick shift and all of that is not so relevant anymore, and I can talk about recuperation and one pedal drive, which is much. I feel much more at home in that kind of world, I must say. But of course I love cars, and I also love classic cars for their looks and for their performance. Of course I do, and for the feeling, how it feels driving them. But I was never a part of that like super nerdy crowd, I must admit. And for me, boats are just as fascinating. And the boat that I have right now was designed by a friend of mine who I studied with at the Royal College of Art. We did the same course at the same time, and he went into boat design, I went into car design, and now we can drive each other's products, and it's pilot each other's products. So it's really nice.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, look, I wouldn't say that I'm myself a petrol head. I don't change my own oil and stuff like that, but there's something about that gear shift, there's something about the sound, right? And it's like, that's a huge kind of topic, I suppose, to address within electric vehicles, the sound, right? You don't have a burbling V8 that everybody knows what that sounds like, or at least, people that are into cars do. And it has a certain connotation, right? It's like, the burble it means something, right?
Yeah.
It speaks, it has its own language. The regenerative, brake pedal, if that's kicking on, a bit too strongly and stuff, it has a very different feel, right? And the sound of an electric vehicle, of an electric motor whirring, is a very different sound to the burble of a V8. And I feel like you're losing a lot of the five senses and the attributes really that go into design, in my opinion, is the five senses. Because you can smell a petrol-powered car, right? You can even taste it. Indirectly, the taste, and of course the sound. So you need to kind of make up for that, I suppose, in some aspects, or maybe it's just something different that I'm, still kind of coming to terms with. Because electric cars are still relatively new, right? I mean, people are jumping on the bandwagon because they have to, but it's still something that I think there's a lot that we can still embody with design, right? Some quality of design. There's a lot of scope there to work from, not only from it opens up and frees up the passenger cabin because the electric motors are smaller type thing. There's a lot of possibilities there to work through.
Well,
right? Do you feel the same way?
There are a lot of emotions connected to combustion engines, but I would say on the far end of the spectrum, when it's really high performance, when you get correlated to the sound, you get immediate torque and power. That's absolutely, I can totally relate to that, and I love it too. There's some raw, deep quality to this experience, absolutely. But the problem is that, let's say, most of the spectrum of everyday mobility is in the area where you press the accelerator, the little engine makes a hell of a noise because it tries really hard to get its couple of horsepower to give you a bit of speed, So, and that's the reality of most people. And I think there will be the enthusiasts that will have this incredibly powerful, holistic combustion powertrains wrapped in beautiful design, and I think that I can believe that this will continue for a while. It's like race horses or beautiful competition horses. I think that will happen, and that will continue. But the large bulk of just these poor little combustion engines that can hardly pull their own weight, they can be replaced by nice and clean and silent electric motors, and I think that's just for the better of everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm a huge proponent for electric vehicles. Living in London as well, there's certain things that you are afforded as an electric vehicle owner and driver that you are not driving around. And I'm just, I'm not just talking convenience, of course, but cost, economic.
Mm.
No, I mean, look, I'm a big believer in electric vehicles because of the performance potential. You've got a tiny car that can accelerate in such a small amount of time. The only thing that I find that's a bit annoying is the infrastructure giving the certain models that you drive have a better infrastructure associated with them, can charge faster, and therefore alleviate much of the pain points of electric vehicles, whereas others don't and they take forever. And you can't just plug them into your house because that takes just a donkey's years
But
to charge your car.
this is taken from today's point of view, and I think
Right.
you know how the industry works, and you also know that there is kind of an exponential speed of development when the whole world puts their minds to something, and we see that now. There's chemistry improvements popping up of batteries all the time. There's even complete alternative chemistries that in the works. Solid state. There's so many ways, and I think the whole range anxiety topic will not be such a big issue in a couple of years. And even now you can debate, is it really as big as an issue as some people make it? But it clearly is still a challenge, but we will get to the point rather sooner than later where that will not be an issue anymore, because technology is picking up extremely fast.
Right. No, I wasn't talking about range anxiety in particular. I mean, I've had a chance to drive electric vehicles, now a few electric vehicles, and I guess the thing that I was addressing was more the user experience of it all, right? Because if I need to charge, say, the Polestar 2, I need to go to a gas station because people in my neighborhood are, shall we say, they're not as friendly, right, as others, and they're a bit selfish, right? They just leave their cars parked in a bay that's an electric parking bay, even though their car is charged up and has been for the last few hours. So you have to go a couple of streets over, and charge at a petrol station, which is a bit more inconvenient than, just rolling up to your suburban shopping mall and plugging it into a supercharger and having the car basically full when you come out after your half an hour shop. So it's little things like that where, I mean, we're spoiled right now. You pull up to a petrol station, you put in your fuel, 10 minutes, you're done, you're on your merry way. But you're absolutely right in what you say. There's so many people working on this right now that, and so many different companies from different perspectives and different vantage points looking into this, that there will be a hell of a lot of solutions coming to the fore in very short amount of time, because of the rate of technology and the fact that people are actively working on finding solutions to these issues that I'm mentioning. But I went off a little bit on this tangent of technology and all of that, and I do want to bring it back to you as a designer and how you've evolved over your career, and in particular for some of the people that might be watching or listening that are along on their, within their career, or perhaps trying to start and get into their career of automotive design. And so there was one thing that I wanted to speak with you about specifically, and that I kind of admired within you. And I remember back in like a while ago now, you and I were driving around Detroit, and there was a recent development within your team. There was a guy that had joined, that you guys had built up, taught and all of this, and then, basically put out in the limelight and said, this is a guy that, is responsible for this vehicle. And shortly thereafter, he seized an opportunity with a competitor car maker. And I remember coming to you and being like, and this is, for me, this is big. It might not be for a lot of other people, but to me, there's only a few things that I guess my mother taught me and that I've retained and will continue and will teach my kids. There's two things in life I think that matter most. One is honesty and transparency. Two is loyalty. and then perhaps 3 then is like compassion and being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and empathy, right? So but to me, the first 2 are honesty and loyalty. And loyalty to me is a big one. And so I turned to you and I said, Max, you taught this guy everything. You brought him up. You put him out on the pedestal. You made him represent this brand. And now he's up and left. And I was like, and aren't you kind of, pissed off a little? And you were like, nah, you weren't at all. You were like, he did what he did, and, I want him to be happy, and if he's happy somewhere else, that's great. That's not something that you kind of come across a lot in the automotive industry. It seems like sometimes certain people will try to keep other people down because they don't want them to be poached. They don't want people signing the sketch because then the company in China that's looking at the BMW is going to say, hey, why don't you come and work for us? Contacting them on LinkedIn or whatever. So there's a lot of that happening and a lot of secrecy, as you know, within the automotive industry to begin with. But that was something that you were perfectly okay with that. And so that kind of leads me into my question for you, which is, one of the last 2 questions I'll ask. What is your management style like, right? Because everybody's different. I know you as an individual. Your character seems to be one that you are happy to kind of let people get on with things. You want to be involved in the process, but you're not going to be like, oh, what are you doing here? Hovering over, waiting over these people. Tell me a little bit about what how is it that you guide your team? Because I know that you're involved because you're quite dedicated to quality and perfectionism as I am, but you're also perhaps more hands-off in terms of letting these guys get on with doing the job that you're paying them to do. Tell me a little bit about your style then, please, Max.
It's a fine line because I think one of the reasons why I was so relaxed and actually happy for him when he left the team is that we do things as a team, and I feel quite confident that I'm very much in control, but in a good way, of what's going on. So I didn't really feel that we're suddenly helpless with somebody that in such a position or such an important role to the team, because it was good for him to get that experience, and now it's good for him to move on to another company, and he will be back at some point, and then he comes with a lot more experience, so that's really good, and I feel that I'm quite a lot in control of what's going on, but I also have the flip side to this, which is I've promised myself that I want to work more via individuals than via control, which means that I am very careful who I pick for the team. I really want to make sure that we speak the same language, and it takes time and it takes effort going back and forth thinking, is this really the right person for the team? Sometimes in the past we used to invite people to a dinner with the team so they really fit in and there's no strange imbalances between characters. So that's one thing. And then I want to give them as much freedom as I can to do what they want. So it should be a bit of, in the end, a car or a design product, such a complex design product, is always a combination of many different individuals and characters. So nobody's ever 100% happy. My vision might be slightly different than the designer's vision, might be slightly different than my CEO's vision, and so on and so forth. And in the end, it's about the best compromise. And if we're doing it right, we will all add on to the product, and it will be better. It will be a multiplier of our individual skills. And that's how I see it. I sometimes jokingly call it superpowers, because I have an idea and the idea is that good. And then I communicate it to the team, we have a discussion, and then they come back with ideas. And sometimes I find ideas that are even better than what I had in mind. They're even a step beyond, and that's what I mean. And this is how it works. Then I give feedback, and then maybe I can improve a corner here and there, and that's how we work. And I really promised to myself that I would never, of course I do it sometimes, but I would try to avoid, let's put it that way, putting hundreds of tapes on a model and saying, this is the line that I expect, and the line should be like this, and it should move this much down, and is it 5 centimeters or 3.5 centimeters? I don't do that. We have verbal feedback, we discuss it, but that is a trust process, because I need to make sure that the team really then understands what I'm looking for and also implements it. Not just like, yeah, whatever, and continue. There must be the trust base, like, hey, if I say something on a verbal base and I really want to change the character of this creature, or I want to move this volume or something, that it will happen. But it doesn't have to happen exactly my way, because maybe there's a better way, and in the process of, okay, let's see, maybe Max has a point, let's try it out, and mostly the result is to a point where the team comes back to me and say, hey, actually, thanks for that comment, because it turned out, after I put my own mind to it and let it run through my own system, I like it even more now. And that's how it has to be, not like I did what he said and that's why it's not mine anymore. This was a very big thing for me, to work this way with the team rather than, let's say, the traditional way.
I love that answer. I mean, trust is huge. If you're working as part of a team and you are responsible for managing people, you need to be able to instill a certain amount of trust in these people. And at the same time, it's always great when you have their feedback coming out and pleasantly surprising you in return, because you put that trust and that confidence in that person, and then their ideas come back better than your own. I mean, there's no better feeling than that, right? No, I love that. So clearly, it's important as well to empower the people that you're working with, and having them come up with solutions and devising solutions to problems on their own. That is supreme. So I suppose my last two questions here are, if somebody was looking to get into automotive design, or to someday reach the level that you are now as VP of design, head of design for a brand, what would be the advice that you would impart to them? Let's start with the young designer first. How do you get into this? Doing what you love day in and day out. And then ultimately the second part, how do you move up within the corporate ladder in order to reach the level that you have?
Maybe one important point would be, don't put the immediate success over the culture and the behavior in the team and in your role. It doesn't matter which level you're in, but what will be noticed over time, if a corporate culture is healthy, that's the prerequisite. I mean, if you're in a healthy culture, then your behaviors and the way how you deal with failure, the way how you deal with success, the way how you deal with input, the diligence with which you react to input will be respected and cherished or appreciated more than winning this competition at all cost. At least what I consider a healthy culture. So that would be one advice. Don't worry. If you know that you did everything right, don't worry. You will get your chance. You will be noticed. Just trust. I mean, as I said in the beginning, that was my situation, that I won quite a lot of competitions, and then totally out of my power, things got cancelled left, right, and center. And I considered it nearly as a personal failure. But it was the way how what I did and how I did it and how I dealt with it, that propelled me into the place where I'm now. That's maybe one thing.
And I think, persistence, the ability to keep getting back up after you get knocked down, coming up with different ideas, looking at things differently, maybe looking at it from a different perspective in order to come up with a different solution. Maybe that would, get it accepted and, have it become recognized. And I'm just talking specifically on projects, but for you as an individual, my advice to anyone is resilience. You need to just develop it. You need to have some sort of thick skin, because a lot of the things, as I said earlier, just won't be successful off the bat. And you need to just pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and say, okay, what's next?
Right.
Or how can I fix this? Or how can I approach this differently so that it will be accepted?
Yeah.
And I think that is just good career advice in general, not just in car design. I think ultimately, there's a lot of things that, I've done over the course of my career that, have succeeded, have not. It's just that's the way it is. And ultimately, you need to just be able to push on and say, okay, I'm gonna come at it from a different angle, or I'm gonna do something different, or I'm gonna change this up because that's clearly not working. And how am I gonna persevere in order to continue to do what it is that I love? And that's my advice to people anyway, is like, keep doing it, man.
Maybe one second thought is to sometimes designers feel that they need to be providers of as many ideas and as many possible tracks as possible for management. I see that a lot, that somebody tries to hedge their bets and put, in every corner they put an idea and hope that this will, hatch. But in reality, I think it's much better to first take a step back, try to get as much information as you can about the product. Why do we need a product like this? Who are the customers? Why should it do what it should do? What's the, make yourself familiar with the brand, very important. And then find out, spend some time, take a step back, spend some time to understand, what do I believe in? What do I really think is the right product? And then work really hard and spend all your focus on this one and maybe 2 variations of it, if you're not entirely sure, because that's fine. I mean, that's what management is there. They can make decisions, they can make a choice. But don't do this like, how do you call that? This is kind of carpet bombing of ideas, where like just trying to cover every base. Just go for what you really believe in, because, and that's always the thing, there'll be about 10 other guys or girls doing the same thing. Imagine if everybody provides 25 proposals, you get crazy as a manager, having to work his way through or her way through it. So the best thing is if I have like 5 people who have 1 or 2 ideas each that are totally convinced, and they can explain to me why this is the thing for the company, for the next product. And then I let the story inspire me, and then together we choose. And this is a much better view, and that will develop your personality as well, and it develop your skills as a designer and not just a stylist.
Awesome. Max, thank you so very much for that contribution. I think that there's a lot there to glean, to be inspired by as well. You shared a lot of amazing information, and it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, man. So I hope that at some point we can do this again in person. But for now, this was a good alternative, and thanks again.
Like in a little rental car in Detroit.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.